In the last episode, I told you about how I was vacationing with my family when I felt what I thought was an earache coming on. I wanted to see a doctor because I didn't want to let an earache wreck our family vacation. This earache was a common symptom of the cancer I had growing in my throat. Now, luck was on my side. I could have easily blown off this earache and not seen a doctor for weeks or months, which would have allowed my cancer to spread. My treatment and my outcome could have been much worse. Once you get over the age of 50, you really need to start listening to your body. And this time, I'm glad I did. Because I was away from home on vacation, I used my insurance provider's website to search for a doctor that was near to me. The clinic they referred me to was only 2 miles from the hotel where we were staying. We went to see the doctor, and he told me that he didn't think the problem was with my ear, but with my tonsil, and that I should see my doctor when I got home. I do think that clinic doctor could have stressed a little harder that I could have something serious and that I needed to see my doctor as soon as I got home. Instead, he made it sound more of a suggestion, which I could have easily blown off. Life gets hectic for all of us, and there were so many opportunities where I could have ignored having a simple earache. All of those alternate opportunities would have led to a tragic outcome for me and my family. Also, I would not be here to talk to you and try to help other cancer patients. My first and only symptom of throat cancer was the earache. Other symptoms of head and neck cancer that you should watch for are blood in the saliva, pain when swallowing, decreased hearing or an earache like I had, particularly if it's accompanied by swallowing difficulties, hoarseness or other voice changes that last more than 2 weeks, or a lump in the neck. I did have a lump in my neck, but it grew so slowly that I didn't notice it was there. I didn't even notice any difficulty swallowing, even though the tumor growing on my tonsil was crossing in front of my esophagus. That's until... It's 2 days after I got my call from my doctor telling me I have cancer. It was 3 weeks after I noticed that earache. My wife and I were having breakfast at Panera, trying to live a normal life. I was having my usual coffee and a toasted bagel. I took a bite of the crunchy bagel, and when I tried to swallow, it got caught in my throat, causing me to choke. I guess the bagel couldn't fit past the tumor that was growing outward from the side of my throat. I coughed hard twice and finally stopped choking, but I felt something in my mouth that wasn't just the bagel. I coughed up my tumor. I spit everything in my mouth into a paper napkin and then peeked. It was gross. I looked at my confused wife with a shocked look on my face, and I said to her, "I think I just coughed up my tumor." I give her a peek inside the napkin, and she's also shocked. We didn't know what to do. I'd never coughed up a tumor before. We called the hospital. It was a weekend, so they had to page the ENT resident on call and have him call us back. We were going to go home and wait, but we needed to bring the tumor with us. I asked my wife to get me something to put the napkin into. She comes back with a soup container. We go home and wait, and eventually the resident ENT calls us back. She doesn't sound like she believes what I'm trying to tell her, so she gives me the stock answer of I should come into the emergency room. But she tells us that she's going to call down to the emergency room and tell them that we are coming and for them to page her when we get there. Yeah, she never did any of that. So 45 minutes later, we walk into the emergency room thinking that they knew we were coming and they knew which doctor they should call. Nope, just a confused nurse wondering why a healthy guy is standing in front of her holding a soup container. She takes my name and tells me to sit down. We were there for over 2 hours. After 2 hours, I was ready to go home. I was feeling fine and I'm done wasting my Saturday. So I tell my wife, we're going home. I'm going to put this container in our freezer and hand it to my ENT at my next appointment. She was having none of that. She goes up and pleads with the nurse that I'm ready to walk out. Of course, suddenly a room opens up and they take us into the back. Eventually, a doctor comes to see me and I tell him my bagel story and how I coughed up my tumor and hand him my soup container. He skeptically puts it aside and proceeds to look me over and down my throat. He does see a spot of blood on my tonsil, but I'm not bleeding very much at all. He then proceeds to open the container, still with a skeptical look on his face, until he unfolds the napkin. He explains that every time someone comes into the ER saying they coughed up some important body part, it turns out just to be a loogie. Around this time, the ENT resident on call shows up, and she's pretty impressed too. She explains that sometimes a tumor can grow so fast that it cuts off its own blood supply. So they sent my tumor with the little bagel bit still stuck to it off to pathology, and I was sent home. A few days later, I had my next appointment with my ENT. Now, at this point in your treatment, you are in a doctor's office at least once a week. He agreed that my tumor probably cut off its own blood supply. The term is central necrosis, and that's why it detached. Of course, I asked if this meant that I was cured, and he laughed and said no, I still had cancer in my tonsil and that it needed to be treated in case it had already metastasized. The way the tumors metastasize is that bits break off and enter the bloodstream and travel to other places in the body. Throat cancer usually spread to the head and chest area. They also spread via the lymph system, which is why during my treatment they nuked 3 of my lymph nodes that looked suspicious, just to be careful. It was actually a good thing that the fast-growing tumor broke off, as that lessened the chance of metastasis. Next, I was scheduled for a chest x-ray to see if the cancer has spread. I still get chest x-rays every year. This is part of my life now. Getting a chest x-ray is no big deal, and believe me, you will get used to it. As we get older, we all get regular testing to check for cancer. People get pap smears and mammograms and colonoscopies, and all of them looking for cancer. But I can tell you that it feels different once you've already had cancer. You're trying to move on with your life, and you regularly get reminded that cancer frequently comes back. You always have to be on the lookout for it. It messes with your head. At this point in my timeline, it's only a week after my diagnosis, and things are moving pretty fast. My wife and I were scheduled to meet my cancer team. It was our first time being in the big fancy cancer center. Things were getting real very fast.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
We arrived there and we were put in an exam room where we waited. The first person through the door was my radiation oncologist. He seemed like a nice enough guy, but later I ended up firing him as my doctor. I'll tell you about that in a future episode. He told me I would be getting 35 radiation treatments and that I would receive them 5 days a week for 7 weeks. Also, I would be meeting with him once a week during my treatment. He then goes on to list all the side effects from the radiation he will be giving me. Skin problems on my face and neck. It's like getting 35 sunburns in a row. Check. It's real. It could damage my salivary glands, causing dry mouth. Check. I have dry mouth. Hoarseness. Pain when swallowing. I can tell you there will be lots of pain when swallowing. Loss of taste. From them nuking your taste buds. Yep, I have loss of taste. Possible breathing trouble from swelling. Tiredness. Yep, there's lots of tiredness. Also hearing problems. Yep. Damage to my thyroid. Yep. I have to get regular blood tests to check the TSH hormone levels in my blood, and every day for the rest of my life, I will take a hormone pill. And lastly, the radiation he was going to give me might cause me to get more cancer. Fun! He then tells me that I have to get a feeding tube put into my stomach because I won't be able to eat. But more on that in another episode. And lastly, I might need a voice therapist to relearn how to talk, but luckily I didn't. Next, we meet my psychology fellow. She said she would be checking in on me and my wife regularly to see how we were doing. We never heard from her again. Next, we met my dietitian. Her name was Cheryl, and right from the beginning, she was our savior. Cheryl became one of the most important people for both me and my wife that we relied on the most, both during my treatment and for several months afterwards. Cheryl would teach us how to care for my PEG tube, and she would coordinate with the home care provider that was going to bring me my feeding supplies and my food. Cheryl monitored my weight, and she coached my wife on how to make sure I did get enough calories in every day, because that became an issue later. I really can't stress enough that you need to get to know and rely on your dietitian. I give that lady a lot of credit for keeping me alive. Next, we met Stanley, my oncologist. He was a very nice guy. I liked him. He explained that I will receive 3 chemotherapy treatments, and this later became 4. I will be receiving them on day 1, day 22, and day 44 of my radiation treatments. On those days, you are at the cancer center for the whole day. On radiation days, you're just there for about 20 minutes. The chemo drug I will be getting is called cisplatin. This later is going to be changed to carboplatin when the cisplatin permanently damaged my hearing and gave me tinnitus. We then went over the many side effects of my chemo drug. Your oncologist acts as your general doctor during your cancer treatment, so any problems that arise, you bring it up with him or her. Like one time I had the hiccups for over 24 hours. It was a side effect from the chemo meds. I called his office, his nurse, and he called in a prescription for me. Cured it right away. Last person through the door was my nurse coordinator. She explained that she will be managing my case and keeping all my treatments on schedule. She will also handle all the paperwork for my insurance, as well as the FMLA and short-term disability paperwork with my employer. She also handled the FMLA paperwork for my wife and my daughter. Don't forget, all your caregivers should file FMLA paperwork with their employers just in case they need it. Their job will be protected. After this meeting, we barely saw her. That first meeting at the cancer center took over 3 hours. It was an incredible amount of information for us to take in that we really weren't ready for. It was physically and emotionally draining for both my wife and I. It's a lot to take in. Your life is about to change forever. There is no way to be prepared for that. In episode 1 and 2, I told you about my experiences discovering that I had something wrong with me and being diagnosed with cancer. Now let's talk about you. How are you doing? How are you coping with your diagnosis? How is your family coping? This is also hard on them, and you need to remember that. Are you talking with someone? You really need to talk about what's happening to you. You really need to speak the words out loud about how you are feeling and about how you are coping or not coping. Even if it's only to a mirror. I had plenty of conversations with myself about what's happening to me in the mirror. Your mental health is just as important as the health of your body right now. You're gonna have good days and you're gonna have bad days. Embrace the good days and try to find some way to keep your brain occupied on the bad days. When I got my diagnosis, I made a conscientious decision that I was going to fight my cancer. I did that for my wife and my children. See, my mother died of cancer, and as a child, it sucked having to watch that process happen to her. I didn't want to make my wife and children watch me die. And as a cancer patient, we have to decide that we are going to try with every ounce of our strength that we're going to live. We are going to show up for every appointment and for every treatment. And every time a nurse pokes a new hole in you, remember that they're doing it for your own good. At the end of your treatment, there's a bell ringing ceremony to celebrate that you completed your treatment. You know why they celebrate it at the end? Because not everybody makes it. You owe it to yourself and to your family to try your best to ring that damn bell. If you are between the time of your diagnosis and the start of your treatment, there are things that you need to focus on, two of them being support and transportation. My treatment went on for 7 weeks, and after it was over, I was in no condition to take care of myself. Eventually, my wife was able to go back to work, and I spent weekdays alone for 2 months. It was hard and scary to be alone like that. You need to figure out who is going to help you get through your treatment and how you are going to get back and forth to those appointments. You cannot do it alone. If you only have a spouse or a partner and no one else, it's really going to be a lot of work for them. You're going to have to consider their mental health. They're going to need a break now and then. I was lucky that my daughter was able to come live with us, and also that my son could take me to my treatments and my doctor's appointments. We even had a family friend who would drive me around. You need to figure out who you can rely on to take care of you when you are sick, because you're going to get sick and need help. It's going to happen. And you need to have a conversation with those people. Can they take time off of work to be with you? If they can, have them file their FMLA paperwork with their employer now. It's better to file the paperwork and not use it than to file it too late. And if they can't take time off of work, or you can't afford the cost of them to miss work, then you need to line up multiple people to fill in the gaps. Always have a plan B. You need to figure out this stuff now while you are still feeling good and still thinking straight. My cancer center is a 45-minute drive from my house each way. I drove there 35 times, 5 days a week for 7 weeks. My appointment time was 1:30 in the afternoon. I was only in the room for 20 minutes each day. And then sometimes you have a doctor's appointment on the same day. On those days, you will be at the cancer center for over an hour, maybe 2 hours if the doctor is backed up. I also had 4 chemo days. Those days, you're at the cancer center 8 hours. Think about being in that situation. How are you going to get to your appointments? For about the first 2 weeks, I drove myself, but my wife came with me. It was about the 10th day that my wife noticed I was falling asleep at a stoplight. That's how weak I'd become. She made me pull over and took over driving. I didn't drive again for over 2 months. You need to think about reliable transportation. Who is going to drive you places for the next 2 or 3 months? Your time slot in the radiation machine, the Liniac, is assigned to you by the radiology department. Your time slot is yours and will be the same every day. But it might get nudged a bit with little or no notice, so be prepared for that. Before your first appointment, they will call you about your time slot. I had a choice of about 2 or 3 time slots that were available. I had to immediately consider every person that might have to drive me and what works best for them instead of me. I chose the 1:30 time slot so my wife could work half a day before having to drive me to the hospital. Depending on your cancer center and how many patients they have, you may not get a choice. You may just be assigned a time slot. My cancer center had 12 machines and time slots from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. My time slot was 15 minutes. Some patients get longer treatments. So 45 minutes travel each way, give or take on traffic, 20 minutes in the building. I was looking at a minimum of 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, that I needed reliable transportation. And like I said, at least once a week, you're seeing the doctor. So those days are at a minimum 3 hours long. And then you have chemo days where you're looking at potentially a 10-hour day. You need to figure out what it's going to take to make all this happen.
And now for a bonus fact.
There was a guy who had the same time slot as me. You will start to get to know these people because you see them every day and you're all going through the same thing. And often it didn't seem like he had anyone driving him. My wife noticed this because all the spouses talk in the waiting room while we go in for our treatments. They develop a bond, and it's really good for them to compare notes about what the both of you are going through. After a while, his wife started accompanying him, and my wife commented to her about how great it was that she was able to drive himself for so long. It turns out he wasn't driving himself. His town provided transportation to and from the hospital, and he used that for as long as he could by himself. So you might want to look into any public transportation that's available to you or Medicare services. I'm sorry if I'm being too blunt with you. Nobody is ever fully prepared for their ride on the cancer bus. My goal is to make your journey a little less sucky than mine was. So please subscribe. Please ring that bell to receive notifications whenever I do post another video. And tell me in the comments if you like the content so far and how you are working out your care and transportation options. Let me know if you have any questions that you would like answered. And as always, thanks for watching.